Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to the panel, The Rise of the Global South and the Quest for an Alternative International Order. My name is Tae-Young Kim from Sungsil University, and I am very honored to chair this prestigious panel. As you know, we are going through great transformation of international order. Everyone pretty much says that the United States-led liberal international order is gone, it's over, but nobody knows for sure what's going to replace it or what's coming next. So one of the possibilities is newly emerging orders, like the emergence of the Global South. Actually, the Global South has been there for a long time, but the true significance of the Global South is coming again. So we are going to see how it's going to be played out. So, and we have an excellent group of presenters and discussants. So without further ado, let's begin. Please, Dr. Panda, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Great pleasure to be here, and thank you for that introduction. Let me also thank KNDA, Professor Undak Cho, and also Dr. Seong Oh for this kind invitation. Great pleasure to be here with all the distinguished panelists here. I think your introductory note about Global South has set the course of this discussion. So what I'm going to do in my presentation is to draw the distinction that is needed today, the distinction between BRICS or BRICS Plus and the Global South. What very often we are seeing when there is a lot of discussion is happening about the changing discourse of international order, then we try to confuse ourselves by saying that BRICS is an offshoot partner formulations of Global South. And we try to draw a lot of parallel, lot of similarity, and try to use it very confusingly. Whereas if we see a little deeply, both BRICS or BRICS Plus and the Global South narrative, both are different. And that difference is significant to draw because in today's geopolitics, that distinction really matters. And that's the core of my paper. And I think this is what I was talking to Professor Undak Cho some time back in New Delhi, when we met. And we discussed that in this changing international order, what is really significant is that there is great power competition, there is middle power formulations, and there is rising power space. But in the rising power space, very often we confusingly used BRICS with the Global South. Now let me draw some of the differences in order to talk about why Global South should not really be confused with a BRICS or BRICS Plus, and why Global South needs a greater identity for itself, even though there has been a lot of debate and discussion about the conceptual formulations of Global South. But at this moment, we don't have a better formulations about that. I'm involved with another research project which talks about Global South and emerging powers or emerging economies. Global South does have a southern hemisphere network, but it is not really defined by that. It is a much more abstract, much more blurred, and much more bigger concept that has a colonial past. And I think that is the narrative of Global South, which really draws its distinctness from BRICS and BRICS Plus today. Now, also what we need to also understand today is that when we are talking about BRICS Plus, we are essentially talking about a cohesive economic grouping. A cohesive economic grouping which are emerging economies and they are having some kind of institutional characters with them. Whereas when we talk about the Global South is a much bigger political, developmental and normative community that we are talking about. And this normative community existed a long time back. It existed 1950s and 1960s. If we go back to, Bandung Conference, if we go back to, late 50s or early 60s, we do talk about the Global South narrative that time. Of course, the concept probably did not really, gain that much importance, but we talk, if we refer to the Asian Relations Conference of 1954-1955, then we do find a trajectory of the origin of Global South from there. So therefore, confusing the two oversimplifies contemporary geopolitics should not be the order of the discussion. Also, what is interesting that we must really take a note of it, that BRICS Plus today represents a kind of a power representation. It's more about powers. It's about economic powers. If we talk about BRICS per se, it's about China, India, Brazil, South Africa, and Russia. And today when we are talking about plus countries, and these plus countries, not necessarily each one of them are rising economies or emerging economies, but they are a part of the BRICS plus mechanisms because of the power configuration that is emerging in global financial architecture. But what about Global South? Global South is a permanent architecture which has not really fully developed, but it still existed 7 to 8 years back, 7 to 8 decades back. And that architecture actually talked about aspirations. It talked about promise. It talked about a future promise. And that's the distinction we need to talk about, because Global South, long before BRICS and BRICS Plus, talked about equity, representation, and developmental justice. And I think, therefore, we need to really capitalize a lot on Global South. And I think when we are talking about Global South, I think the bigger economies are much more focused on tying up with the Global South. I've been doing a couple of other projects. If we talk about South Korea and Japan in particular, both these economies are really focusing a lot on Global South at this moment, rather than on the BRICS power. BRICS is just a mechanism. And given the kind of closer proximity China and Russia has, not many middle-ranked economies or middle powers are really focusing on BRICS. They are rather focusing on the Global South formulations. Because Global South offers an aspiration, it talks about equity, and if we talk about in the context of Japan in particular, Japan talks about Global South in a much more methodological sense. In fact, if we go back to the Japanese foreign policy, they have been focusing with Africa in the TICAD conference for a long time. And this TICAD conference is really talking for a long time about Global South formulations, why middle powers and the rising economies really need to connect well with the Global South, because the Global South are the future of this international order. Now, the other distinction that we need to really talk about, and that is really necessary, is that Global South is much larger than BRICS Plus. BRICS Plus has got a defined, much more narrow-centric agenda, whereas Global South has got a much more global voice, having an impact with the current and future architecture. And therefore, when we are talking about Global South, it actually legitimizes many things in the global politics today. If we are talking about poverty eradication, if we are talking about global governance, if we are talking about representation of the lesser heard voices, the Global South can actually offer that. BRICS is echoing some of the issues that Global South is really talking about. But then BRICS are also talking about its own specific interest, because BRICS and BRICS Plus fight is with the West, with the United States of America, with the dominance of US, with the dominance of European Union. But Global South fight is not necessarily with the West per se. Global South fight is more about its own representation in a future world order. And I think this fight is going on for 6 to 7 decades. And therefore, this is necessary to draw that attention. The other distinction that needs to be really made, and probably we need to really talk about, that when today we are talking about BRICS and BRICS Plus is talking about accelerating multipolarity. Because BRICS Plus is a platform where the powers are distributed. As we heard in the first session, we often try to confuse ourselves by saying multipolarity is the same like multipolar world. Both are different. Multipolar is a accumulation of powers, where multipolarity is the platform where the power is distributed. So there is a distinction. So BRICS Plus is all about multipolarity. That might really represent a kind of facet of multipolar world structure, but it doesn't really represent the entire multipolar architecture or the global south. So BRICS Plus is much more narrower in sense. My last 2 points are that if we talk about the global south is actually today defining the legitimacy of the new order, and we should not really overlook. It's not really the BRICS Plus countries or the BRICS countries like China, India, Russia, South Africa, and Brazil they are defining. There are many other countries, African countries, many Latin American countries. They are actually representing, and also some of the countries from ASEAN region. They formulate and they are an essential and a core ingredients of the global south notion. The other aspect, I think that is a critical to my distinction here, that the emerging order is neither fully bipolar nor fully multipolar. And therefore, the distinction and a clarity of thoughts about global south and BRICS Plus is necessary, because BRICS Plus actually talks about the blurred areas between a bipolar world and a multipolar area. For example, countries like China, we saw what happened during President Trump and President Xi Jinping. They talked almost about like a bipolar shared centric world order. Even though China is a part of the BRICS or BRICS Plus, they are really trying to become ambitious and talk to the Americans that China should have a special table along with the US. And I think, therefore, some of the BRICS countries, they try to, if we talk about Russia talks about a China plus Russia architecture. If we talk about India, India has its own ambition. India talked about Indo-Pacific with the United States and with the Quad powers for a long time to improve its balance of power. So I think there is a very blurred space between BRICS and the BRICS powers' ambition. And that actually brings to the core, core of this middle power configuration. Middle powers could also become an essential component of the global south formulation. They may not really be identical to the global south countries, but they could be the real partner or the developmental partners for the global south countries to shape the narrative of the future order. And who are these middle powers we are really talking about? And I think if we talk about the middle powers, particularly 3 countries, South Korea, Japan, and Australia. These are the 3 countries we could have a much more serious collaboration with the global south countries, including India, and I think that is necessary for the future of the world order. And I would conclude by saying that what we are seeing a much more long-drawn, silent revolution taking place. Of course, this revolution is not necessarily going to, throw the weight of the Western order. The Western order influence will still be there, because all of these global south countries are still being very dependent on IMF, World Bank, WTO, and many other financial institutions. But look at the United States of America under Trump 2.0. They have withdrawn almost from 30, 40 plus international institutions. And that itself create a vacuum in an international order that global south countries needs to really stay united, collaborate with the middle powers, particularly with South Korea, Japan, and Australia much more seriously, so that we could actually save the future of the international order in times to come. I'll stop here and probably invite your comments and criticism in time to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Panda. We always talk about the global south, and we always talk about the BRICS, but we don't know for sure about their definitions and distinctions, and Dr. Panda just clarified them. Thank you. And Dr. Xue Li, the floor is yours, and you got 15 minutes.
Okay. Move forward to the first page. Next one. Again. One more. Continue. Okay. Thank you very much for the organizer, chair, and also thanks the Professor Lee to recommend me to attend this conference. This is I think almost 6 or 7 years I haven't been here. In 15 minutes, because I have article in this collection, so in the 15 minutes I will focus on the two topic or two part. The part number one is era of the civilizational competition. I make a little bit change with my articles here. So this morning, Professor Achaya say we are in the decline of the Western order and emergence of the post-Western world. This kind of the opinion, it seems to me, is accepted by the increasing IR international relations scholars, just as he say, from different continents. But in South Korea, maybe it's kind of different. And so the problem is what kind of the order is shaping. Achaya didn't answer this one. He say it's not multipolar, it's a multi-complex. That means what? It's not so clear. I will try to answer this one based on my research. I'm sure that we are heading to a new era, which is an era of the civilizational competition. Why? Based on the following arguments. It totally is 4 or 5. The number one, of course, is because of the U.S. After the Second World War, American is a leader of the world, which organized the post-World War II international organization through cooperate with European, Soviet Union, and other countries. That's the basic fact. But the problem is, since the 9/11, and then come to the 2008 international financial crisis, and then there is a big debate in the United States between the two parties until to the 2015. I think they will reach the consensus among the elites of the United States. They need to make a change. It should not be the old role that they played for more than half centuries. It seems to me, since 2015, United States is turning to a new isolationism. What does it mean, the new isolationism? We always know that the isolationism, there's a long period in the United States. It can be start from the George Washington, the farewell speech, until the Second World War. After the First World War, United States tries to break through the isolationism but the then President, Wilson failed. Just until the Second World War, United States no longer stick to the isolationism and become the global power. But now, I would say, United States try to turn into a new isolationism. 3 points for that. It no longer has a will, mainly it's a political will, to lead the world. For many reasons, all of you will understand the meaning. It also has no enough capability to lead the world from the owning or unique superpower to one of the main powers. And its identity also make a change from a hegemon to a Western country and attach importance to the Western hemisphere again. We are no longer global countries. We need to pay much more attention to the Western hemisphere. That's our sphere, influence sphere, right? So, before the Second World War, European is the center of the world. After the Second World War, United States is the center of the world. But now, United States say, I don't want to be the leader. I don't have enough capability to be the world leader. So the problem is, if another civilization has a capability as well as the will to lead the world, my argument is all of them are regional civilizations. It's hard for them to become a recognized global leader because of the context of the times. Move forward. In the era of the civilizational competition, I would say, non-Western civilizations. This one, Western civilization, when we talk about Western civilization, we really refer to the Protestant Catholic civilizations. It excludes Orthodox civilizations. Non-Western civilizations are emerging of, number one, is the Chinese civilization. Number two is the Hinduism. I won't say it's Hindu. I say it should be the Hinduism civilization. It's emerging. It's very obvious, particularly during the Modi administration. Powerful. Maybe you will agree with it, right? That's a fact. And then, of course, they have another rival or object. Is with the Islamic civilization. Sound like that. Okay. Then also we have the Sunni civilization. We have the Shia civilization, the Turkish civilization, African civilization, mainly just the sub-Sahara area, Latin American civilization, Orthodox civilization, Japanese civilization. So we have a lot of civilization. So, number two is the competition performs the key characteristic of the relationship among civilization, which means the cooperation is the mainstream of the relationships among the civilization. Cooperation is the tributary part of the relationship between them, and conflict happens regionally or partially. I don't think a new world war will come out in foreseeable future. Move forward. Part two, based on this context, what the kind of the Chinese diplomacy towards the global South is, I would say, the 5 points. China will focusing on the cooperation and development. The outcome is, number two, largest economy in the world and largest trade partners for more than 100 20 countries. Since reform and open up policy was enforced since 1979, China never launched a war and will keep it in foreseeable future. I would like to say this is the first country in our history. There's no another countries go this way. Think about Japan, Germany, United States, France, British. All of them launch a lot of war. Right. Second one, Global South. I think that, in my opinion, the Global South will perform as the main object countries as well as the main partners for China. Belt and Road Initiative is kind of the big, before, at the beginning, it's a strategy. Now, Chinese government changed it from a strategy to an initiative. I think I focus on the BRI research for more than 10 years. Already published 6 books, and another 2 books is forthcoming. According to my research, I would say BRI is mainly focused on the Global South countries. China has signed BRI agreements with 153 countries, which take the 80% of the UN members. And priority orders in China's diplomacy towards the Global South. I say about a priority order. Number 1 is the neighboring countries. Be careful. Here, just refer to the non-developed countries, which means countries like Japan and South Korea is not the main partnership for China's BRI. I will strongly argue for this. And then come to the African continent. That's the top 2 for Chinese BRI strategy or initiative. And then we'll say about the Western Asia countries, Latin American and Caribbean countries, Central and East European countries, and then Oceanian countries will stay at the last one, in which cooperation with the Western countries will continue. However, the room is smaller than that between China and the Global South. That's the basic fact. I have no need to explain anymore. Last point. How about the diplomacy towards the US? A lot of say China is a G2 or whatever. I would say very hard. Basically because China is different from the Protestant and Catholic civilization. It almost close to be a universal civilization. But besides that, all civilizations are local or regional civilizations, which is very hard for those kind of country or those kind of civilization grow up to be the world leader and to be the to take the role that the United States has played before. The influence after even China become a very great power. GDP is as large as the United States, even larger than the United States. China still a regional power with global influence only. So during this one, I would say Chinese diplomacy towards the United States. My argument is the 缠斗. I don't know how to translate it, this one in English. It roughly, I can say, is the Chinese still like to cooperate with the United States. Meanwhile, there is a lot of the competition with the United States. Sometimes have some struggling for a core interest like Taiwan issue. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Xue Li. Dr. Xue Li explains the current international order based on different civilizations rather than material power. And based on the civilization perspective, he explains China's diplomacy toward the global south. Very interesting. Thank you. And Professor Dong-seok Kim, the floor is yours. You got 10 minutes.
Yeah. Good afternoon. My name is Dong-seok Kim. Today, I will make a presentation on the rise of Africa and its implications for Korean diplomacy. So since the 2000s, Africa has been emerging as a blue ocean. People around the world start to abandon negative images attached to Africa and reassess Africa's values and potentials. Africa possesses great economic potential. The economies of countries such as Ivory Coast, Ethiopia, Kenya, Morocco, and Rwanda have been growing rapidly. Abundant resources such as cobalt, nickel, gold, diamond, among others, and huge fertile land, and large youth population, and expanding commercial markets comprise Africa's economic potential. And Africa also holds great political potential. Africa is part of the global south. African countries account for about 35 to 40% of the global south countries. Africa is striving to raise voices, collective voices, on political and economic issues within the global south, within the UN, and within other international organizations. So Africa has expanded influence on international institutions such as UN and G20. Some chiefs of international institutions hail from Africa. Also, Africa provides a model for conflict resolution, reconciliation, and peaceful coexistence, illustrated by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa. And amid the ongoing crisis in the Middle East, Africa is emerging as an alternative transport route. The US-Israel war against Iran makes people realize that political unrest or upheavals in the Middle East endangers the Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea, and ultimately jeopardizes the global economy. So people pay more attention to Africa as an alternative transport route. That's why China, United Arab Emirates, Turkey, Russia, and many countries invest more in the port development in South Africa, Ethiopia, Somalia, and Nigeria, and other countries. Okay, and African cultures, music, movie, art are gaining popularity around the world. So as Africa has been emerging as a blue ocean, China, United States, European countries, Russia, Turkey, Brazil, UAE, Saudi Arabia, etc., recognize the importance of Africa and are advancing towards Africa. Yeah. China's Africa is an, as you say, important partner of BRI. China's BRI, and that's an example. So concerns, but this advancement, new advancement, raise concerns about another scramble for Africa. And people, some experts, criticize, these countries' new interest in Africa for the reincarceration of colonialism. Korea and Africa. Korea shares history with Africa. Korea was colonized by Japan for 35 years. Many African countries suffered colonial rule. And Korean War decimated South Korea. Many African countries were ravaged by civil war or other types of war. Poverty was rampant and infrastructure was in shambles. So after the end of the Korean War, South Korea received a huge amount of aid from the international community. And Korea succeeded in transforming from underdeveloped country to developed one. Yeah. Undergoing this transformation, Korea is indebted to the international community. So many Koreans contend that Korea has an obligation to repay this favor by foster cooperative relationship with African countries. So Korea strives to vitalize relations with Africa and to establish genuine win-win relations. And how to forge genuine partnership with Africa? I want to emphasize people-centered approach. Korea cherishes or emphasizes human resources. Since the 1960s, medical doctors, agricultural engineers, taekwondo instructors have settled and worked in various African countries. They are acting as like a diplomat at that time. And young volunteers are dispatched to African countries, interacting with people and working hard to improve the lives of Africans. And the number of Koreans traveling to Africa is rising. And vice versa, more and more Africans study or work in Korea. And K-culture is gaining popularity in Africa. I lived in South Africa for 2 months and I visited like 14 or 15 African countries. Those people in those countries are very familiar with K-culture. And K-culture's popularity is rising, that I found. Mutual human exchange helped to enhance Korea's understanding of Africa and Africa's understanding of Korea, which lays the foundation for Korea's genuine partnership with Africa. The number of high-ranking officials visit has increased. So Korean president visited African countries in 1982, 2006, 2011, 2016, and last year. Yeah. And 2 years ago, Korea-Africa Summit was held. All 48 invited countries sent delegation, 25 head of states attended the summit. At the summit, the Korean government proclaimed to galvanize cooperation in a wide range of areas, including development, resources, peace, climate change, and agriculture. The summit generates an opportunity to upgrade Korea-Africa relations. Next. And this year, I think exactly like 3 weeks ago, 2026 Korea-Africa Foreign Ministers Summit took place. As a Foreign Ministers meeting took place as the summit follow-up event. Representatives from 50 countries and four regional bodies congregated in Korea and discussed various issues relevant to Korea and Africa. So the Korean government reaffirmed commitments made by the 2024 summit, and one of the notable things is that the Korea proposed the Korea-Africa summit in 2029. So, which means that Korea shows its intention to routinize the Korea-Africa summit. And private-to-private exchanges need to be encouraged. So like sports, music, movie, and other cultural activities are great tools to fostering genuine understanding. Now, shifting gears to development cooperation, the amount of ODA to Africa has increased gradually. ODA to Africa comprises like about 25% of the entire Korea ODA. The Korean government endeavors to forge cooperation in the areas of IT, education, agriculture, healthcare, etc. And sharpening the understanding of Africa is essential to boosting development cooperation. So development cooperation lays the foundation for private investment that African countries want. More and more African leaders emphasize not only aid but also investments. So African leaders want to translate aid into development, like investment. So Korean companies can invest in manufacturing, electricity, education, and agriculture, which contributes to improving people's lives. So Korea needs to focus zero in on basic essential things that Africa needs the most. That's one is food, water, electricity, infrastructure, and internet. And also transferring technology to locals is key to achieving economic growth. And Korea boosts its contribution to resolving conflict, installing peace, and accomplishing political stability in Africa. The Korean government provides financial resources to AU Peace Fund and contribute to UN peacekeeping forces currently deployed in South Sudan and to multinational forces combating the Somali piracy. And Korean government also seek to support the improvement of governance in Africa. Africa's underdevelopment is caused by lack of good governance. A lot of people argue. So, like for instance, the help it Korean government can help the African countries to organize elections, or to help the African government to ameliorate the administrative systems, etc. And Korea need to galvanize. Korean government is galvanizing effort to address global issues such as refugee, women and children, climate change, and health issues. So Korea diplomacy needs to globalize further. And how does Korea achieve both economic growth and democratization? Yeah, that's the question that many times I receive when I visit African countries. So transferring know-how is essential, so African countries can customize it to the extent to suit their conditions. And also, Korea needs to learn from Africa. Learn how African countries resolve conflicts, harmonize diverse groups and communities, and foster reconciliations. So I will conclude with some suggestions for future Korea's diplomacy. So Korean government, is doing now, but approach Africa in a genuine and sincere manner. And implementation of the declaration made by the Korea-Africa Summit and Foreign Ministers meeting matters. So Korean government should endeavor to implement the declaration as much as possible. And Korean government need to routinize the summit like China's FOCAD and Japan's TICAD to foster genuine relationship with Africa, and utilize multilateral summit and forge close ties with AU and sub-regional bodies in order to overcome the limitations of bilateral diplomacy and expand opportunities for mutual exchanges among ordinary people. And government, Korea need to exert effort both to spread the K culture and to increase access to African cultures. One way spread of culture is embedded, reflect the imperialistic mind. So Korea should steer clear of this kind of mentality, and design and implement projects that fit Africa's needs and contribute to its development. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Kim. Professor Kim explains how Africa is rising and what it means to the global politics, and South Korea's important relationships with this growing Africa. And which is good. South Korea has been paying a lot of attention to the African continent, and the relationship has been developing. That's wonderful. But maybe not tomorrow. Tomorrow morning, South Korean national football team has a big showdown with one of the African teams. So we'll see how it turns out. Okay. Thank you all to the presenters, and we also have excellent discussants. Since we don't have much time, please, Professor Che, please go ahead. You got 5 minutes.
Only 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Hi everyone. I'm Professor Kyung-jun Choi at Political Science Department in Konkuk University. It's my pleasure to participate in this discussion on the rise of the global south and the quest for an alternative international order. More specifically, I'm very happy to take the role as a discussant on Professor Panda's presentation and paper. Professor Panda's paper and presentation offer significant insight into understanding the direction of today's international political structure. Many people are talking about the transformation from a unipolar structure dominated by the United States toward some kinds of bipolar structure composed of the United States and China. Many people are talking about U.S.-China conflict. However, the rising importance of the global South and the role and functions of the BRICS highlight some kinds of the possibility of transformation into not into a bipolar structure, but some kinds of multipolar structure. So these kinds of discussion on the role of the global South and function of the BRICS and some kinds of distinction and similarity between BRICS and the global South would provide significant implication for our deeper understanding about some kinds of great transformation of international structure or international system. An important point raised by Professor Panda in his presentation is definitely the differences between the global South and BRICS countries, which are often overshadowed by their similarities. Okay? So Professor Panda clarifies the clear distinction between the global South and the BRICS. Okay? The global South as newly independent nations that have experienced colonial rule and still remain economically underdeveloped inherits the legacy of non-aligned movement and advocates for some kinds of more equal international order and some kinds of equal possibility, equal chance for accomplishing economic development. But as Professor Panda points out, BRICS, this organization, its focus is more narrow and concentrate on more specific issues such as some kinds of the formation of new international financial system, and they try to utilize their geopolitical and geoeconomic leverage in order to cope with some kinds of the Western-centered international order. Okay. Professor Panda's arguments, as I already mentioned, offers significant insight for properly recognizing the similarity and differences between these two political international entities. But I want to raise several points of discussion in order to more develop for our understanding about the characteristics and role of BRICS and the global South. First, although BRICS cannot be said, as Professor Panda pointed out, it cannot be said to solely represent the global South. It is important to consider whether any other international organizations or international entities that represent the voices and demands of the global South countries. In other words, we cannot overestimate, over-evaluate the role of the BRICS as a representative of the global South. However, we need to think about other kinds of international organizations or some regional organizations that truly represent the role or truly represent the demands and asks of the global South countries. Okay? We need to examine which international cooperative organizations, aside from BRICS, have been established or being envisioned by the countries of the global South, as well as how the demands and voices of the global South have been collectively expressed within various international organizations and institutions. This is very important because many scholars or people are very critical of regarding the role of the global South. In other words, the global South countries actually have cooperated with Western countries in order to accomplish their economic development. Okay, so we do not have to over-evaluate the BRICS, but we need to think about how the global South countries have played some kinds of important role in international politics as some kinds of collective entity or some kinds of the organization or entity that have some kind of internal cohesion and internal cooperation. The second point is about the role of China and Russia in the world of Global South. Considering the overlaps and distinction between the Global South and the BRICS, the question arises as to whether these two countries, China and Russia, can be included in the Global South. In other words, the BRICS, this organization contains China and Russia as important members. However, there are many debates about whether China and Russia, these two countries, can be included in the Global South. Actually, the inclusion or exclusion of these two countries in the Global South world contains some kinds of strategic interaction between China, Russia, and the United States. In other words, the United States has argued that China is not a member of the Global South. In other words, strategically, the United States does not want China would be some kinds of the leading country of the Global South. The United States want distinction between China on the one hand and remaining Global South countries on the other hand. On the other hand, China actually, as Professor Lee already explained in his discussion and paper, China has argued some kinds of collaboration or some kind of shared identity with the Global South countries. China want to be a member, not only one member, but some kinds of leader, a leader in the Global South, and one extend its influence over the Global South. We also need to address Russia's position toward the Global South. So important thing is that whether China and Russia, whether these two countries have clearly clarified their identity and role in various international organizations, not only in BRICS, but also many kinds of international organizations such as the United Nations or other regional and multilateral organizations in terms of their identity and role or principles related with the Global South. Okay, this is my major points regarding Professor Panda's presentation. Again, I was very happy because this presentation addresses very important issue in international politics, especially in terms of the rise of the Global South and the role of BRICS. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Che. And Professor Hyung-Chun Kim, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Shelley. So I very much enjoyed your papers because your paper is timely, very important, and thought-provoking papers. So particularly because it brings the concept of the civilization back to the study of the geopolitics and offer an interesting perspective on China's engagement with the Global South. So actually, I'm very sympathetic to one of the implications of your papers. So it seems possible that the diplomacy grounded in the civilization identity may place the greater emphasis on harmony rather than hierarchies, even when it's used as an instrument of the state powers. So in this sense, the possibility that the Chinese civilizational discourse offer an alternative vision of the international order deserve the serious consideration. So my first comment concerns the concept of the civilization itself. Throughout your papers, the civilization appears at different times as a historical tradition, political identities, and diplomatic discourse. These meanings overlap, but they are not identical. For this reason, I think it would be helpful to clarify whether civilization is understood primarily as a historical identity or a geopolitical formation or a strategic discourse which is mobilized by the state. Without such clarifications, there's a risk that civilization becomes broad descriptive terms rather than a precise analytical categories. Second point, I would encourage clearer distinction between China as a state and China as a civilization. This is the long-lasting question whether China is a state or the civilizations. So China is a sovereign state pursuing security, economic, and political interests. Therefore, it may be analytically more precise to see China not as a civilization acting in international politics, but as a state that strategically mobilizes civilizational identities. This leads to what I see as the paper's central analytical questions. So how much explanatory weight should be assigned to civilization itself? The papers and your presentation discuss issues such as the BRI and connectivity, infrastructure development, and great power competitions. So these are largely geopolitical and economic phenomena. These raise an important question. Does civilization independently shape China's foreign policy behaviors? Or does it primarily provide a language throughout which geopolitical and geo-economic ambitions are legitimized and mobilized? These are different arguments, and they require different kind of the evidence. So finally, comparative perspective may be also useful. Though China is not the only country employing civilizational discourse. As you mentioned, that Russia, India, and Turkey have all invoked civilizational identity in different ways. So to conclude, I raise this question not to dismiss the potential value of the civilizational approach to international relations. Rather, if concepts such as harmonies and mutual respect and then non-interference are central to China's civilization vision, then the key analytical challenge is to demonstrate how these principles translate into the concrete pattern of behaviors and retrains in the exercise of the China's power. So my central question again is whether civilization itself shaped China's foreign policies, or whether it primarily serves as a discourse through which strategic interests are justified and advanced. Again, I really enjoyed your paper. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Kim. And Professor Jisun Song, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Kim, for a very comprehensive and insightful presentation into the rise of Africa amid the international order, as well as Korea and Africa's partnership. It was a very comprehensive overview. I felt like reading a textbook. So I just had a couple, so I would like to provide my 2 cents as well as questions to Professor Kim's presentation. I do agree that the presentation highlighted in detail the value of Africa in the present and future across multiple dimensions, from social, economic, political to diplomatic. As mentioned in the presentation, Africa is playing a significant role and displaying a great potential in shaping international order by expanding its influence. And I think it's also worth noting that Africa is taking the initiative in solving its own problems. Most notable examples would be the Africa CDC, as well as the Africa Continental FTA, and most recently, talks of setting up regional funds to self-fund regional development and to resolve regional development challenges. So in a way, instead of relying on external assistance, which has been proved to be less stable than expected, especially with the change in developed countries' foreign aid strategy, Africa is committed to solving its own problems with its own hand. And in addition, Africa is trying to have a better control over its resources while diversifying its partnership as a way to shift from a reactive recipient to a proactive global stakeholder. And I think this is evident from the recent global health MOUs with the US government, where countries in Africa are putting their national interest at the very forefront. And third, Africa is collectively pushing for global governance reform to better represent its continent, most notably in the UN Security Council. Yet challenges remain, and this is where I would like to ask the presenter for his opinion on the following questions. First is, how much of the collective action among African countries do you think is actually possible? In the presentation, you talked about Africa more as a group, but I as you would well know, there are gaps in representation, there are gaps in financial, natural, human resources, development stage, peace and security among different African countries. And representation at multilateral platform is somewhat limited to South Africa, such as at G20 and BRICS. So how much of a barrier will this be in bringing the continent together? Is there actually a common agenda that can bring all African countries together? And I do think in the course of discussing this, numbers should matter, as we have 54 countries in Africa, whereas there are 11 ASEAN members. Perhaps differences between the potential and the actual capacity that Africa holds as a continent should be made. Second is, what consensus or collective action building mechanisms does Africa have at the moment? For instance, at the African Union, what comparative advantages and limitations does such mechanism have when compared to other regional platforms such as ASEAN, where things are made based on consensus? Have there been any African Union's agenda that's been well implemented based on collective support from the continent? And third is, how can Africa break its dependence on external financial resources to maintain its national interest and priorities? For instance, support for infrastructure, health, and even AI from major providers have been criticized for undermining Africa's sovereignty. Providers are showing stronger interest in commercial diplomacy with Africa over traditional foreign aid partnership. So unless Africa is able to mobilize significant domestic resources whose potential may be limited to selective countries in the short run, the so-and-so vicious cycle of dependency may prolong. In terms of the Korea-African relations for the future, I do also agree that the presentation described in detail the history as well as the progress made. Korea has certainly improved its people-to-people exchange and development cooperation diplomacy with countries in the African continent over the years. And of course, as mentioned, the first ever summit with the region was held in 2024. But I also do think that in this area there are challenges. First is the scale and scope of Korea's engagement with Africa. This is the case for both public and private sector. Compared to Korea's engagement in Asia, that in Africa does fall short in diplomatic, social, economic, and development cooperation. As there are more countries in Africa, bilateral relations also tend to be quite limited. Economic-wise, including trade and investment, there is less interest from the Korean private sector, with limited number and type of private companies venturing into the African market. ODA is also facing tough times, while 20% or 25% has been mentioned. As long as the total budget doesn't increase, the actual amount to the region will certainly decrease. Second is lack of priority. There is great development need in Africa for sure, and at the same time, Korea needs to provide its support more strategically. In this sense, Korea will need to further sophisticate and prioritize its partner countries and sectors. And having a clear agenda in the region can also help the region better understand Korea's agenda. Third is the need to upgrade, Korea's need to upgrade its engagement with Africa to a much more strategic level amid the changing international order. Africa will certainly continue to expand its influence in global governance and in global agenda. That is, African countries will strive to act as a primary agenda setters in multilateral platforms, in particular by shaping the Global South priorities in partnerships with other countries of the Global South. The current government also places high priority in diversifying its diplomatic engagement with the Global South and better respond to global challenges. And in this case, while having the regional approach, Korea will need to develop a much more tailored bilateral partnership strategy that meets both mutual interest and priorities. And that is it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Song. Every presenter and discussant has kept the time limit, which is the best any panel chair could ask for. So we have some time left. I'll open the floor to the audience. Please, if you have any questions. Yeah, please.
Hello, I'm Jiun Cha from Seoul National University. I'm a doctoral student, and I have a question for all the, Mr. Xue Li and Dr. Panda. My question is actually like when we talk about the global south, it's a really ambiguous definition that brought all the countries together, but there are no clear the forces that drive those countries together. Like when we talk about those EU, we say like in the past there was Soviet Unions, or like they have the shared goal, but like when we talk about the global south, I don't see any kind of like the shared like maybe memories or like a forces that drives those countries together. The global south is a quite a large group of countries, and but at the same time, it is quite curious for me that how those countries are standing on the same side when on some global agendas. And so my question is that what drives the global south countries to act as they are a group on the global agenda for three of the presenters. Thank you.
Any other questions from the audience?
I wasn't planning to ask any questions, just enjoying what the presenters have said and then presented. I really enjoyed Panda's presentation, so I would like to ask you whether you could further elaborate the possibility or area of cooperation between Global South and Middle Powers. Probably you can exemplify some specific cases or potential opportunities. And then also I really enjoyed the Xue Li's presentation, but I agree with Professor Kim Hyung-jong's comments and then questions. I would like to hear more about the relationship with civilizational conflicts or competition. And I think your concept, co-petition, is not really new. Many people talked about it. So it would be great if you could further elaborate what kind of, how would you see this so-called, let's say, we don't know what kind of world order is going to come out eventually, when and where, and then probably you could more focus on, instead of what kind of order is coming out, maybe you can focus on the processes. How do you see the Sino-US rivalry and cooperation in this process? You would like to see more peaceful transition, or more conflict, how can I say, more confrontational phases? And lastly, Professor Kim Dong-seok, I learned a lot actually, and then I lived in Latin America and then Africa actually for some time. So I'd like to see, but as the commentator, discussant mentioned, Africa is not really unified actor. So how do you, what's the South Korean government's approach to see this global South, and especially the African countries?
Thank you. So from the Dr. Panda, including the discussants' comments and
Right, right,
indications from the audience.
Okay.
You got about 4 minutes.
Okay. So first, let me answer the discussions. Thank you very much for those useful comments. Really helpful, and I'm going to develop this as a paper. So your comments will be really beneficial for this paper. Thank you. Your point about whether there are any other groups are there which really better represent the global south better? No, we don't have. But then there are institutions which are there which shares the interest of the global south. For example, African Union. If we talk about African Union, they almost talk about some of the issues which are very identical or similar to the global south. If we talk about ASEAN per se, some of the ASEAN issues that ASEAN discuss are very close to the global south agenda. If we talk about SARC, South Asian Association of Regional Cooperation, of course SARC is not really very functional these days because of India-Pakistan conflict. But if we talk about SARC, original agenda and their, original motives, it was actually very closely looking at some of the issues which actually Global South really talked about. So probably BRICS has succeeded to the extent of, echoing the spirit of the Global South much more than some of these institutions like, African Union, ASEAN, what they have done. Because African Union, ASEAN and SARC, they represent a sub-region or a specific regions, whereas BRICS represents the wider gamut of the emerging economies. So therefore, there is a lot of overlap between BRICS and Global South. But at the same time, we should not really misperceive them as identical. Yes, BRICS is really a forceful organization which is coming with a new development bank, with talking about connectivity, governance issues, and echoes a lot of spirits that Global South really originally talked about. But they are definitely not identical. So thank you very much for that point, which is very helpful. I will come to the question about specific areas of collaborations. I think there are a lot of governance issues. For example, climate issues, climate governance, renewable energy, poverty eradication. Pandemic happened, COVID-19 pandemic happened, so health crisis is one of those issues which actually brings together the BRICS countries, the BRICS plus countries, as well as the Global South countries. But I think the distinction here also needs to be made is that BRICS today and the BRICS plus countries today talking about really forcefully talking about reforming the global financial institutions, particularly the Bretton Woods institutions. But the Global South countries are not really talking about those issues. So that could be a medium of collaborations because both the countries are actually in Global South and BRICS countries, they have a common interest when it comes to alternative financial institutions or alternative financial architectures. So therefore, we need to talk about the reform of the global financial institution, particularly the Bretton Woods institutions. Also a small point that if we talk about the BRICS and BRICS plus countries, they are working more as interest groups, trying to represent their core interest. And the Global South countries are also working individually or as a sub-regionally, as I mentioned, more as interest-based groups. How they could collaborate on some of these issues to act more as pressure groups, that needs to be seen. So from interest groups to pressure groups, if that transition can be made through specific issue collaborations like governance issues, climate, health, pandemic, and renewable energy, poverty eradication, and also on infrastructure and connectivity issues, that would be the common areas to collaborate and try to have a. Oh, okay.
You have to think about there are many areas it requires and some cooperation.
Okay.
We are also quite.
I missed the middle power. I missed the middle power thing. So there are 3 areas where specifically middle powers could collaborate with the global south countries, or in fact to some of the BRICS plus countries. One is that if we talk about the global, middle powers, particularly South Korea, Japan, Australia, they are countries which could offer a lot of donations, financial aid, and assistance programs in order to address some of these issues like health pandemic, poverty eradication, governance issues. So that could be one area. The second area is that it is necessary to have the support of the middle powers in bigger forums to create that pressure tactics against the Western hegemony, particularly in IMF, World Bank, and WTO. If we talk about US and Europe, they have the maximum disputes today either with China or with India when it comes to trade and economy. So there we need the middle power support. The global south countries need global middle powers. And third is, I think this is a new area which is coming up, is cyber, ocean governance, hybrid security, and the global south countries, the emerging economies, they are actually suffering a lot, and probably countries like Japan, South Korea could actually come and have that necessary collaborations to help these countries and guide these countries. So that would actually save the future governance process much better. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's some questions for me, 1, 2, 3. First of all, I would like thank Professor King for your care for reading this one. I traveling a lot in the world. I think I already visited 50 countries in the world, in the United States or Canada or European. Only in Korea, the discussions write down stuff here. That means it really impressed me a lot. I think that's very good. Thank you very much for you spend a lot of time to writing this. Okay, and second one, I would say my paper is not an empirical research. It's just like a piece, a think piece. It's from a paper for the China News, which is weekly. So, in my academic paper, I will try to answer question from you. You question, you raise a lot of the challenges, and also occasionally some misunderstanding. Okay, just like you say, I just use the civilization as the important political languages or rhetoric. In my opinion, it's not that. Okay, so my argument is geopolitics or geoeconomics is only two perspectives for us to view the world. That's not enough, because we are not God. We are the ordinary people. We cannot, like a God, view the things completely, systemically, very deep. We just view the things from a different perspective. So I will try to find a new lens to view the world. I think in that sense, civilizations matters. So I go to the Samuel Huntington. But main difference between me and Samuel Huntington is that Huntington said the crest of the civilization is the key characteristic among the civilizations. I would totally disagree with this one. Why Huntington make this kind of the judgment? Partially just because of he lived in the context of the monotheism civilization. And go beyond this kind of the context, go to India, go to China, and go to the Africa, people will dislike this kind of thing. Only right along confrontation-based perspective, that's different. And my argument is that according to the Samuel Huntington, the crest between the four lines of the civilization is the main part of the relationship among civilization. I will argue that the cooperation between the civilizations will serve as the main part. Later, I will give a case, some example. So that's why I use this one. And also, what's the, how to, you said the competition is not a new word, it's a old word. I agree with that. My point is that the competition is a combination of the cooperation and competition. But you can see that which kind is the main part. For my argument, that's the cooperation is the main part, and competition is the secondary part. Okay, for instance, relationship between China and the U.S. Someone said nowadays the relationship or nature of the relationship between in China and U.S. totally changed from the cooperation, mainly cooperation, shift to the competition or conflict serve as the main part. I would disagree with that. I would say that relationship between United States and China is complicated. It depends on the different subject or different topic. For some topic, they are partners, trade, people-to-people relationship, students exchange, they are still partners. But when it comes to the advanced technology, ID technology, they are competitors. Come to the issue like the South China Sea, like the Taiwan issue, they will serve as the potential enemy. It's different, complicated, right? Before the war come out, like the Taiwan issue, the relationship between China and the United States, they are still the partner. There are a lot of the cooperation, trade part, right? Still largest, number one trade part. United States is the largest trade part for China. Also, most of the Chinese students like to go to the United States rather than other countries. You cannot think that the Soviet Union will happen this kind of phenomenon. Okay. When you talk about the new order, what kind of a new order? United States don't want to be the leader. I will say we don't have the new order yet. The new order is in making. What we can say is we are in the era of the civilization competition. In the future, because the cooperation after some decades, maybe we'll see a new world order, right? Okay, and then the question for the student from the National Seoul University: what's the dynamic for the global South serve as the agent to cooperate with countries, maybe some from North, from South? I think first is emotion or sense. We are belonging to the developing country. We have the sense for the similar countries. Number two is the reason, want to get the benefit. When the global South strengthen relationship with the global South, like China, India, they also make a deep cooperation with the global North. They want to get benefit from both sides. That's quite reasonable choice, right? And also, I will say that the one thing is, because China is developed very quickly, some countries like to learn some experience from China, which means United States or European countries is not the one model for them to achieve modernization. China offer an alternative case, let's say, like Vietnam, that's a socialist country, you call it, right? Also Ethiopia, Rwanda, many countries just want to learn something from China, right? Also, the last one, just now you talk about the middle power. In my opinion, the middle power, there is no definition for the middle power. From Japan until Australia, until Singapore, Israel, they are all middle power. It at least it includes two parts: developed country and developing countries. So it depends. When you talk about this one, you need to clarify this one and what kind of role they will play. Thank you.
Can I quickly respond to the middle power, or maybe after that? Okay.
Yes. So I will make it brief. So Africa consists of 54 countries. Yes, Africa is diverse. You know, every country has their own interest, and state interests collide with each other. And inflation countries such as Nigeria, South Africa, Ethiopia spearhead efforts to address political and economic issues relevant to African countries. But I'd like to stress that African countries are trying to promote unity through institutions such as AU and other ECOWAS and other sub-regional organizations. So the mechanisms, like decision-making or conflict resolution mechanisms of these institutions are very inclusive. Not just dominant countries like lead these organizations. So like small countries and weak countries can raise their own voices in these organizations. And African leaders also assert sovereignty over like mineral resources and or like economic and political issues. Try to diversify their economy and escape from heavy reliance on resources. So African leaders does not bow to like a Western pressure or pressure from outside anymore. So
Thank you. Because the organizers asked us to quit soon. Thank you all, the presenters and discussants and the excellent audience and the staff, everyone in this room. And also I thank to the KAIS and Korea Foundation for organizing this excellent and prestigious panel. I hope this panel and what we discussed would contribute to further dialogue and exchange. Thank you.